Hi, today we're going to talk about buoys. Some Bowie knives are very stout and heavy and meant for use in heavy duty work environments like say camping or some people like survival type of purposes with knives, and they think of them more as a type of knife that can do everything. And for other people like myself, we prefer to look at a Bowie as more of a fighting type of weapon or potential use as a fighter. What makes the difference in a Bowie? Basically, the classical Bowie has a clip point, and usually the blade is quite heavy and large. This might be a little bit easier to see. There are different parameters when you look at a Bowie knife that will affect its characteristics in terms of handling and its ability to do different things. When you look at the blade, obviously the first thing you see is the blade length going from the hilt to the tip. When we talk about the edge, we normally define it from the sharpened portion closest to the hilt to the tip. But blade length has an impact on its overall handling ability, obviously, and will also affect its comfort and ability to be carried readily. But typically, Bowie knives are about 9 to, I've seen them as long as 12 inches in length, and that's usually measured from the hilt to the tip. When you look at it from the aspect of the spine of the blade to the edge, we would call that the blade width. And on a fighting Bowie, it'll be a little bit narrower than on say a lot of camp buoys. These particular fighters are about 1.5 inches in blade width. Another thing to look at is when you look at the spine of the knife, the aspect of it closest to the hilt tends to be thicker and heavier on a working knife, on a knife that's meant for survival, meant for camping, for those type of heavy duty purposes. You want the spine strong so that it'll be able to endure, say, chopping activities, possibly prying things, but you want the blade to be stout. On a fighter, I'll give you an example. You probably can't see because we can't zoom in here. These are two knives made by the same maker. Both knives are fighters, yet this knife here is much quicker than this knife here. This one has a much thicker spine, this one less so. When you have a fighting Bowie, you want the buoys to be tapered so that when you look at it from the top down, you'll see that the blade becomes progressively thinner as you approach the tip. Typically, the thinness starts at around the top of the clip going towards the point, although some people will make it progressively thinner even back here to try to lighten up the blade. On a fighting Bowie, you have obviously different potentials. Like this one has a curved guard to catch the blade. It also has a Spanish notch cut into it. So those are useful if you think you might be engaged in potentially trapping with the knife. But it's not necessary for fighting Bowie. This Bowie here, hopefully you can see this. I apologize for wearing a dark shirt with the black Damascus, but this one obviously does not have a curved guard and no notch. But this blade is amazing in that if you were to look at it from the edge down, you'll see how aggressively ground this blade is, so that although the back here is as thick as my larger fighting Bowie there, it is not anywhere near as full in the belly, in the mid part of the blade, as those are. So what that does is this makes this knife incredibly light and incredibly fast. Fast handling can make the difference between getting your strikes and thrusts in initially relative to an opponent, and can allow you to move quicker. A lot of people equate speed with life. When you look at these two Bowies, although this one is considerably heavier than this one, the balance point on both are the same. That allows the blade to be readily used for back cutting. You know, you can go in different motions relatively easily. And that's because of the balance. Another thing to consider is handle design. Hopefully you can see from there, but this one is what they call a dog bone handle. And this one is just a regular ironwood handle. And this one doesn't have any of the grip lines or contours cut into the handle like this one does. But yet, because of the lightness of the blade and the balance point on this blade, it handles very well. So you can, move very quickly. A thing to consider is when you're talking about possibly used for fighting purposes is impact against other weapons. You'll have people who will try to, knock your weapon out of your hand. If you were to use a Bowie in an attempt to stop a larger weapon, machete, or even potentially, a club or whatever, obviously the heavier your own weapon, the less impact is absorbed. When you're working with a lighter blade, because you have less mass, your technique has to be much, much better. It's not as forgiving as a blade that's a little bit heavier. But like I said, a heavier, larger blade, while it's good for things like chopping, camping, survival type training, you're not going to be able to carry that around as comfortably as a lighter knife. And if you're actually engaged in a physical altercation with these kind of blades, lighter means faster. So just something to think about. But I just wanted to point those out, that those are some of the different things that make one Bowie different than another. The weight, the length, how it tapers, how it's ground, whether or not it has a regular hilt or a curved hilt, whether it has a notch or no, and whether or not the handles are contoured to allow for different types of gripping variations. So just wanted to mention that you don't see too many clips like this out there that talk about these kind of things, and I just figured it would be worthwhile to pass this information along. Okay? The best ways to really find out about Bowies, what you like, what you don't like, obviously, in my opinion, is to actually pick them up and handle them. I recommend going to shows or contacting the makers, discussing with them what your specific needs are, what you would like, the characteristics that appeal to you in a Bowie. Makers I recommend. My personal favorite is John M. Smith, if you can find his work. While the price you might pay today is considerably higher than it was back in the 90s, I personally think it's worth it. Greg Covington makes an awesome Bowie. He does really, really nice work. And I also like work made by Kevin Cashen and Harvey Dean. Those are really good knife makers to consider, especially if you're looking for a fighting Bowie.